Okay, so today what I want to do is basically continue the modeling part of our lecture series. But what I want to show you is a handful of kind of more involved, I suppose, kinds of ways of approaching 3D modeling. And I will just turn all of my chats off so we don't get bothered by people clamoring for my assistance. There we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in Rhino. We'll spend about the first sort of 45 minutes in Rhino. Then we'll have a quick break and we'll also make some time for any questions about modeling so far. If there's anything that you're trying to model that you're thinking, oh, wow, there's just absolutely no way I'm even aware of how to get started with that. None of the techniques that I've shown you kind of cover that. That's a really good opportunity to ask some questions. And then what I want to do is kind of expand your minds a little bit about what's possible with a computer, because Rhino's great, and I'll show you some ways in which you can model quite involved things. But there are even more powerful programs that will allow us to do things not just in 3D space, but over time as well, because they kind of make use of animation and simulation and these kinds of things. So effectively, what I want to do is show you some of the ways in which you can use programs that were originally designed for visual effects in films, and you can actually use those to generate geometry, which is kind of fun, kind of cool. So let's get started. I'll just double check that this is still going. Yes, it is. Good. Does anyone need what's it? A QR code again. There it is. If you've just arrived. Whilst that loads up. Right, so here we are. We're in Rhino. We're going to import our people. Import our people. Here they are, living on my desktop, just so that they're there. And obviously, some of the ways in which we can start to work, what I'm actually going to do is just simplify this down a little bit to just this one person, just so we can kind of have a good understanding of the scale we're at. Maybe I'll also change the spacing of my grid, so I've got a little bit more of an obvious kind of platform to start with. Now, a really, like, one of the ways I find it's quite interesting to think about modeling is to sort of realize that you're never designing anything in a sort of a vacuum. There's always some context. And that context might be as simple as some existing buildings, might be your site, might be some trees, might be a road. And in fact, it doesn't really matter what it is, but you can quite quickly kind of mass out your site. And hopefully you're now at a stage, I think we're in week 7, aren't we, where in the digital, at the very least, you have some kind of massing. And maybe your existing buildings actually aren't boxes, but they're a little bit, polyline, thank you very much. They're a little bit more interesting shapes. Maybe there's a funny angle to one of them like this, but then effectively we can, I'm just going to use my snapping tool, and then I can extrude that curve. And I'm going to say I want it to be solid, so it's got a top and a bottom. Potentially, you're going to find yourself with an existing site. And one of the interesting things that you can do with Rhino is you can start to use the geometry that you already have to generate new forms. And one of the nicest ways of doing that is, let's just come into here. Let's think about, what a nice spatial experience this person could have. Maybe like a little pavilion or like an entrance hall or something like that. This is kind of literally one of the things that if I'm just struggling to know exactly what to do, I might start by kind of modeling around a person, like sort of imagine that like you're building them a little cocoon around that person, and then by modeling around the person, you've got the scale kind of given to you. You can't go wrong with the scale. You don't have to think, oh, how many meters is that? We're using this person to kind of help us out. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put one box here and maybe another box here, and maybe that one's a little bit taller. I don't know, let's think of a narrative here. Maybe this is some kind of art museum, and maybe what we want to do is kind of build a new entrance route into this art museum or something like that. Well, we can use the command blend surf. And what we can do is we can say, well, wouldn't it be great if we took this edge of this top of this box and we blended it to something else, like, oh, I don't know, let's bring it down here and just see what happens. And it's going to go into this one. Now, already, you can now see that I've got a little bit of control over this, but this thing starts out being a roof and then becomes a wall. Yeah? And it blends between one and the other. And all I did to start with was just put some boxes down. But now, with one click, I've got a very, very complex shape that actually would be very, very difficult to build. And you can see, actually, there's something really wrong with this shape. If you can see these, like, I don't know if you can see on the screen, there's these kind of lines, like shadowy lines in that surface. That means that the computer is really struggling to deal with that curvature. And if the computer can struggle to even make the curvature happen in its own brain, in fact, I think in this case here, it's kind of curving through itself, which means it's just impossible to build. You can't really build that. What you can do is start to play with the options here, and maybe let's just relax that whole thing so it's got a bit more room to breathe. I kind of like that. I'm going to accept that. And now what I have is this kind of like quite interesting shape that's the starting point potentially for, maybe my new entranceway, something like that. Let's also think, okay, what if we started at this, start down here. Whoop. We'll come this way a little bit, and then we'll open out, and then we'll join this one here. So I've just drawn a line on the ground. That's all I've done, really. And maybe I want another line that starts up here, whoop, comes this way, comes out a little bit, or maybe a little bit further forward. Yeah, there we go. And maybe it comes all the way up to the top of this box. So now I've got this kind of big swoop, this swooping two curves. And once you have two curves, well, what can you do with two curves to make a surface? There's a really good command. It begins with L. Remember it from a couple of weeks ago? Check your notes. You probably wrote it down. Got two curves or multiple curves, and I want to get a surface that goes through those curves. It is loft. The reason for sort of like checking your memory is because it's one of the ones which isn't obvious. It isn't make whole. It's loft. And why is it loft? Well, you just have to kind of learn it. So I'm going to select these two lines. I'm going to type loft. And then I've got, wow. I mean, suddenly already we've got this kind of really interesting kind of figure going on here, right? Now, you might then think, okay, well, it'd be interesting to kind of then start to enclose this, right? But we could enclose it in a number of ways. I think it would be interesting to think, well, let's go from here to, I'm going to put a point down on the ground, and I'm going to come up here to the edge there. This point, maybe I want to lift it up. So actually, I have a roof that kind of curves. I mean, maybe this is all going to be a bit much. It's going to cost a lot of money. But now what I have is, wouldn't it be great if I had a surface that kind of followed this curve and this curve and this curve? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Now, what I can't do in this case is I can't loft between here and here. partly because this curve here goes all the way up. So, okay, so now I need to fix that. So I take this curve and I can split it by a point. And when you type split, usually you split by another object. So in this case, I could split that curve by this curve because they kind of meet. But I can also split by a point. And just by typing P or point, then it says point to split curve, and I just pick that point there. Boop, there we are. Enter when done. And now what I have is one curve here. I don't know if you can see that's highlighted yellow. That's one side of the split that I've just made. And then the other curve is the rest of it. So I'm kind of nearly there. But if I try and loft between this curve and this curve, then what I'm going to get is a straight line between the two, which isn't what I had in mind. I wanted to use that curvy thing, right? So now this is where it's going to get a little bit more interesting, because what we can do is we can use a command called sweep. And a sweep is, I'll just demonstrate a sweep over here, is a rail and then another curve. In fact, if I'll take this point here and just drag that down. There we go. So this is a rail, and this is going to be a cross-section curve. And what I can do is sweep one. So I'm sweeping one curve along one other curve. Select the rail. Select the sweep shape. There it is. Press enter. And now I get that shape, which is basically dragging that cross-section along that rail. So sweep can be really useful. However, we can do something else, which is that what if we had a desire that we have this cross-section, but we kind of stretch it between different rails? Well, we can do sweep 2. There's sweep 1 and there's sweep 2. Sweep 2 allows you to do the first rail, the second rail, and then the sweep shape. And then what that will do is it will expand out this shape here all the way along. So now I've got, like, basically there's kind of almost no shape you can't make with this. You've got the ability to kind of curve things with a cross section and then 2 rails, which is basically exactly what we have going on with this roof. So we've got sweep 2. Sweeps are really, really powerful. If you practice some sweeps, kind of like, you know, I was saying about musical instruments, practicing sweeps is like practicing your scales. And then you'll find yourself in this situation where you're like, oh, I need to make this quite complex shape. Oh, a sweep will do it. Sweep 2. Here we go. First rail, this one. Second rail, this one. Sweep shape, this one. And boom, I've got this really interesting roof shape that has now kind of like appeared. And all I started with was boxes. Are you kind of getting where I'm going with this? And I could obviously keep going, and potentially also it might be interesting to think, well, I only did this shape between 2 curves. I could do what I did a couple of weeks ago and extract ISO curve. Remember that? I'm going to toggle this way, and maybe I'm going to take a couple of different ISO curves here. I can delete that. And then maybe these 2, maybe I want to take this one out a little bit and this one in a little bit. And now what I end up with is this incredibly complex curvy wall that if I loft there, I've got a wall that starts off. Oh, it's actually completely broken. I know why. It's because I split this curve. That's no good, is it? Right? Come back to where you were before. This one and this one. And now I want to join them together again. Thank you very much. There we go. And now we loft. There we go. And now we've got not just that overall sweep shape, but the extract ISO curve process kind of allowed me to go into more detail into that. And I could obviously keep going. Now, clearly there's something sort of a bit Zaha about this. And this is basically how like a Zaha Hadid architects or even like a Libeskind, they would just use straight lines rather than curvy lines. But you're interested in how your interaction with the site and putting a person at the center of it allows you to explore making different spaces. Any questions on that before I carry on? I'll show you a couple of other things. Yeah, it is. It should be. Let me check. Yes, it is. Reminds me, I'll put my key press on so you can see when I'm holding down control. Okay. All right. Oh yeah, sorry, carry on.
What if you want to model something that's like, for example, made out of like wood, but then it has that like curvy form, or like not exactly like smooth?
When you say curvy form, you mean like an actual bit of a tree or something?
No, I mean like, for example, like if you have like wooden panels or something, like, for example, wooden like triangle panels.
Yeah.
How would you model those into creating like?
Yes. I'm going to show you that. In fact, I was going to show you that later on, but maybe I'll show you now. Well, why not? Let's move things around. Okay, cool. Let's say we're really interested in this shape. You know, we think, oh, that's actually pretty cool. What I'm going to do is actually I'm going to make a copy of it over here. I'm going to think, well, this is kind of this really interesting like facade idea here. Maybe just to keep myself honest, I'm going to move a person over here. And I think, okay, it would be nice just to isolate that, wouldn't it? So now I can see, you know, there's this person and there's this kind of facade that I've come up with just by playing around with some shapes. They're driven by the site, right? You know, but effectively, you know, I've just got this kind of overall shape. And your question is, well, what if I wanted to make this out of multiple small panels and they all need to kind of like fit all very, very neatly and it's all got to be great, right? Well, there are a few different ways of tackling that. The first way within Rhino itself that would make it easiest is not necessarily the way that you would end up wanting to construct it in reality. And I'll show you this particular way of working just because I find it quite helpful to kind of understand the sequence of processes that you would do in Rhino to build this up. Because there is no button where you just click it and you say, oh, it's gonna work. It's all gonna be good. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with, and I think I showed you this before, basically like a flat shape on the floor that's roughly the same sort of aspect ratio and size to the shape that I want to match up. And so effectively what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some stuff over here on this flat, simple surface. And then I'm going to apply whatever I do to that to my complex surface. This one gives me the ability to solve a simple problem and then let the computer apply that to a complicated problem. So the first thing I need to do is I need to type planar surf to turn my flat rectangle into just a solid or a thin but rectangular simple surface on the ground. And if I type dir, that will show me the direction that this surface is pointing. So every surface has a front and a back. And at the moment, it's pointing upwards. It's kind of front up. It's not upside down or like, I think of it as like a piece of toast. Like the piece of toast has butter on one side and it doesn't have butter on the other. And if you accidentally put your toast butter side down, it's not going to be very helpful for you. So we're going to do dir, and then I also want to just check what's the direction that this surface thinks it's going in. And interestingly, this surface thinks that the butter is on the other side. So already it would be really helpful to make sure that the butter is the same side up for both of these surfaces so that they kind of match. And one of the things you can do when you've typed dir, which is just direction, just what direction is this surface going in, is you can flip it. So I'm going to say flip, there it is, and now all the white arrows, the butter of the toast, are pointing in the direction that I actually want. So I'm going to press go, and now if I type dir again, it will show me those white arrows firing towards me rather than away from me. So that kind of sets me up fairly well. Then the next thing I can do is, and I'm going to think, let's go a little bit complex here. I'm going to start with, I want to divide, I'm going to type divide, this side of the surface, and I'm going to choose the surface edge, divide that surface edge into how many sections? Maybe, I don't know, 10? And what divide does is it puts a whole load of points all the way along that line. That's all it does. It just takes a line, divides it into points that are equally spaced along that line. So there it is, divide, 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 divide. And I'm going to divide this one, this surface edge, by maybe that's 5 rather than 10. So now what I have is this kind of grid, this equally spaced grid. And what I can do is I can draw a rectangle that hits that point there and this point here. Oh, I just need to turn off my center snap because that's messing everything up. This point here and that point there. And so it's lining up. You see it's got that little gray snapping lines lining up with that. And now what I have is the guide rails for an interesting little surface. I'm going to make a 4-point surface. And all that does is just puts a little surface here. However, I can now press F10. F10, there we are. And I'm going to take that surface point and I'm going to lift it up. I'm going to imagine that actually maybe what I want on this facade is like a whole load of flaps that I could open and close, maybe. That might be interesting. Like it lets in either the rainwater or the sunlight or something like that. And maybe I want to have a conversation about this facade opening and closing. So it's more than just a panel that just sits there. It's actually got some kind of like Z depth to it. And maybe I want to bring that this way a little bit and this way a bit. So now what I can do is I can array this object, and I know I divided one side into 10 and the other side into 5. So I want 10 in one direction, and I want 5 in the other direction, and I want 1 in the Z direction going up. I only want one layer of this stuff. And then it just allows me to click the mouse 2 times. I'm going to click in this corner, and then you'll see my mouse allows me to basically make 10 by 5 copies of this thing. So I haven't had to copy and paste it 50 times. I can just click array, and then I'm going to match that up exactly. Boom, there we go. Press enter when done. And now what I have is these flaps that are kind of open across the whole of my surface. So it's quite complex, kind of repetitive pattern. Now what I can do is I can select all of those. Boop. In fact, I'll just take the point off, so it's not selecting the point. There it is. Select all of those points, all of these surfaces, and I'm not selecting the base surface. I haven't selected that. And what I'm going to do is, I showed you this before. Someone had a question about putting text over a curved surface, and I used the command flow along surface. Do you remember that? Maybe you got it written down in a note somewhere. I can do exactly the same thing. Flow along surf. Flow along surf. And it says, choose a base surface. So I'll choose an edge near a corner. I'll choose this edge down here. Boop. And then it says choose a target surface. I'm going to choose the same corner on the target surface that I want. And I've made sure that the butter is the right side up on both of those things, so it's not going to sort of do a bit funny thing. I'm going to choose this corner. There we go. And now what's happened is it has mapped each one of these things onto my curvy surface. And not only that, it's also curved it so that if the base surface is curved, then the whole thing is now curved along with that. And I don't know how long it would have taken you, probably a very long time, to actually model this in detail. like you just wouldn't have been able to do it. I think you wouldn't have been able to like work out exactly where that geometry is going to go. But already instantly, this is kind of an interesting thing. I would think of these as like, because the way it's opening up that way makes me think of this as like a rain catcher or something. This isn't really about sunlight. This is about like catching the rain or something like that. And already this is quite an interesting kind of shape. However, what you'll notice is every single one of these panels is now different. So what you'd have to do if you were building this in real life is you'd have to go to a manufacturer and you'd say, I don't just want 50 of your XYZ panels. I want 50 completely different panels that every single one of them are unique. So in real life, this wouldn't be done this way. This would be much more something where you try and rationalize that geometry so that you could make it into something that you could make out of repetitive copies of panels. Because every single one of these has got to be made unique, one-off, one-of-a-kind, bespoke. But it does make for some pretty cool geometry. What I will actually now do is show you something that I like to do very, very much, which is I'm going to do that same thing again, but I'm going to show you a little trick called record history. Oh, yeah, sorry, you had a question. It's called flow along surface, or flow along surf, SRF. Because, Rhino knows you don't have time. So, flow along. Oh, you got to type all those out. But surf, that's a small one. Record history is super cool. This is kind of where you suddenly realize that stuff like, you've probably seen people, especially maybe in year 3, playing with like Grasshopper and those kind of parametric tools. And they have like a slider and they can like slide a number up and down and it'll change something in their model and the whole thing will like regenerate. You don't need Grasshopper to be able to do that. What you need is record history. So record history, what it'll do is it remembers the geometry that you used to do the next step. And if you go back and change the initial geometry that you used, then it'll update all of the steps that you just made. So it'll be like you go back in time, you change your mind, and it'll do it all again. But it'll do it instantly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn record history on. So it's highlighted, it's bold. And now I'm going to do that array function again. Select objects to array. I'm going to array this one. Press enter when done. And I want 10 in that direction, 5 in that direction. And it's remembered 10 and 5. That's what I typed in before. Number in Z directions there. And then I'm going to go from here to here. And it's sort of because I divided it up and made sure it was all right. And there we go. Now, because record history was on, what I can do is I can come back to this original geometry that I used to array. I can press F10 and I can change my mind about how open that thing is. And everything else will update. Because it'll basically have remembered that this is like the master version of the geometry, and everything else is just an arrayed copy of it. So if I change my mind, then it'll update everything else. So now I've got this kind of control over how open these flappy things are. Yeah? It's if you're used to things like Blender or 3ds Max, it's kind of like that. What I did effectively is that I selected the object, I made sure record history was turned on, and now Rhino knows that there's a relationship between this object and then the arrayed copies of it. Now, what you'll probably get is if you then come over here and you nudge it, it's going to give you a warning. And the warning says dragging broke history on one object. Because basically, you've now done something that it can't now keep that relationship between the parent object and the children. That warning is quite useful because it'll stop you being silly with something that you've got that history on. Although sometimes you don't need that history anymore and you're happy and you move on. So the thing is, now I can record history 2 times in a row. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure record history is on, and I'm going to type flow along surf. It's flow along surface, and it says pick your base. surface. So pick this one. And for my target surface, I'm going to pick this one. Creating some meshes. Oh. It's because the only thing I had selected was the control point for one of these items. Actually, what I need to do is select them properly. There we go. Let's try that again. Flow along surface. Here's my base object. Here's my target surface. There it is. Now, do that one more time. I'm going to make sure record history is turned on, because otherwise it won't remember. Flow along surface. Record history is turned on. There we go. Boop. Boop. There we go. And now, what's going to happen is I come back to my original object. I press F10. If I adjust this, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to adjust all the arrayed children copies. And then it's going to remember that those copies are then flowed along the more complicated surface. So basically, I now have the ability to control everything with one click of a mouse, which is kind of fun. And maybe what I can then do is I can say, I don't want this to be a question of like a rain catcher or something. Maybe what I want to do is take this thing back to this corner where it belongs. And I want to take this surface point. I want to bring this one up. Now I get a completely different set of surfaces that I'm dealing with here. Are we enjoying the process of designing something just a little bit mad? Was that helpful to kind of understand? Basically, you don't do it in one go. You build up a number of operations. Now, clearly, we could do this a little bit simpler if we wanted to. So the reality is, there we go. I'm going to take this surface here. I'm going to copy it down here. Now I need where I'm just going to go back to here. There we go. This one, copy it down here. If all you want are flat panels, that's easy to do, because what we can then do is we can do a polygon. Let's do hexagons, because hexagons all like fit together, don't they? So I'm going to draw myself a hexagon here. Oh no, I need number of size 6. There we go. Here's a hexagon. I'm just going to kind of pick a size. Here we go. I'm going to move that so that it's sitting up here. And then I'm going to move that so it's sitting there. And then I'm going to make some copies of that. Let's think. The best thing I need to do here is to copy that from here to here. There we go. And then I think what I should be able to do is array. I'm going to do this in 2 parts. I'm going to array it linearly along the top. And then I'm going to array that copy all the way down. And I'm not going to worry about record history for this because I'm just going to do it once. Array linear. The number of items, let's just do too many and we'll come back to it. And then I can copy this all the way across. And then there's too many here, so I can just get rid of some of those that I don't need. There we go. And obviously, if I was being a bit more careful, I'd measure this up exactly and make sure that it all worked out. But then I can array this linearly. Actually, I probably only need 6 or something of these. And then this is going to go from here to here. And now I've got this kind of beeswax, bees nest, beehive pattern. And we could do exactly the same thing. If we wanted to, we can do flow along surface, select these objects, and you'd be a lot more careful than I would be about making sure they all go to the edge and all that kind of stuff, but press enter when done. Choose the base surface, choose the target surface. And then what we've ended up with is these lines kind of painted on the surface. Now, again, these are going to be like squished and they've kind of gone small and then big again. The fact is, though, that with a CNC machine, if all you're doing is cutting bits out of wood, there's no real difference with the CNC machine about cutting out something that's one size or a slightly different size. So you can do that kind of thing in a much more unique and bespoke way. So you can have a much more interesting thing here. The other option is, I'm just going to redo that and then take those lines and pop them over here just so that we don't lose them. There we go. The other thing you could do, which is just a little bit more simple, is we could project lines onto that surface without worrying about the curvature. So what we can do is come over here to a side view like this. So we're looking just completely side on. And then I'm going to take my beeswax pattern, my beehive pattern. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to rotate it upwards. And maybe I'm also going to make another copy of it that kind of goes all the way up there. So I've got more than enough. And then what I've ended up with is basically like this kind of repeating pattern that I can project from these curves. Oh, yeah, curves that I want to project. There are the curves. Direction, I'm going to use select curves and points to project, direction custom. There we go. And then select surfaces to project onto. So I want to project these curves onto this one. Press enter when done. Projection direction, well, all it does is it kind of gives me two points to press with a mouse to say which way do you want them to go. And clearly I want them to go this way. There we go. And now I've basically like painted these onto that from that direction. So I've kind of like, it's like I had if I used like a light source, this is the shadow that would cast. So all of those options are kind of available to you to explore different ways of kind of splitting up that surface. Does that, in a very long-winded way, answer your question? It gives you some ideas anyway. Okay, cool. Any other questions before I move on? Cool. I want to also show you sub D. Has anyone come across sub D in Rhino before? Just give me a wave. A couple of people, you've been playing with it. Do you enjoy sub D? You like it? Yeah, okay. So sub D, again, I'm going to move my person over here. Here we go. Sub D is a different way of modeling. It's got various similarities to the way that surface on lofting and curves modeling, it's called NURBS modeling, but curve-based surface modeling. But there's a significant difference, which is it feels much more like a way of working that you'd find more in sort of mesh-based modeling programs like Maya or 3ds Max. And what you do when you're doing sub-D modeling is you make very liberal use of different ways of selecting an object. So one of the things that I kept on showing you today is like, once you've got a surface, you can just like select just the edge of the surface if you want to loft a curve. You don't have to draw a curve there. You just select the edge of a curve, the edge of a surface, and it will behave like a curve. A sub-D box, all I did was type sub-D box, and I'll just start with a box. And what you'll notice is I drew a box, but what I ended up with is this kind of weird lozenge shape. And if I switch, what I want to do is I want to see the box that I drew before it turned it into a lozenge shape. I can press the tab key on my keyboard. And when I tab, what I'm doing is I'm switching between spiky box mode and smooth sub D, like 3D kind of lozenge mode. And what I want you to realize is that there's a massive similarity between that and the fact that I'm going to draw a curve which has, I'm going to actually use, here we go. I'm going to use these control points and I'm going to draw a polyline which goes from there to there to there. Spiky, got a hard surface, hard corner. And then when you want a curve that goes using those exact same points, you get this kind of curve that goes in between. Well, this is exactly the same, except instead of a curve, it's a 3D shape. It's got 3 dimensions. So effectively what I can do is rather than click on this thing and then type F10 to find my control points, I can switch between seeing the control points, as it were, using the tab key, and then the sort of smoothed version of that thing. And the tab key is really super helpful in that. But what I can do, and this is kind of where most people, when they're using things like sub-D or mesh-based modeling, is they end up like just making sort of weird strings of chewing gum and spaghetti. But what you can do is you can say, well, this is made up of 4 little panels on here, 4 little panels on here, 4 little panels on here. And I can just select one of them by using Control and Shift. Control and Shift. And then I can drag that chap up. Oh, just had a little mo. There we go. I can drag that face up or down. And effectively, I've got this thing that kind of feels like I'm playing with like clay or something, or like a balloon or something like that, which is a very different way of working to drawing the lines that you want and then producing the surfaces. The other thing that we can do is we can drag this up and hold down Control, and then what that will do is kind of have an extra growth that comes out of my object that comes from that panel, from that face. I can Control Shift, and I can select just that edge, and I can move the edge, and that kind of starts to play with this. And if I want to, I can switch back using a tab to my spiky view and see the differences that it makes. So one of the things that this tends to get used for much more is kind of the automotive industry. So people will kind of like play a bit with, I don't know, this ends up being like, you can imagine this being the start of like a car or a spaceship or something like that. I'm just going to start sort of like fiddling around. What we can do is a sub D mirror or just mirror. It's under sub D tools. There it is. There's a little thing that looks like a mirror. It's not actually a mirror. It's reflect. My apologies. Reflect sub D object. And then we'll select this object. And it says start of reflection plane. And I'm going to choose this one and this one. There we go. And now I've got a reflected sub D, which whatever I do to one side, it will do to the other. So I could quite easily build something that looks like, let's just have a think here. I'll take this face and I'll hold down Control and I'll come out there and then I'll bring this guy forward. And then maybe I want to insert edge. Select edge from loop. No. Insert. Is that not? Insert edge. Select edge from loop. This one. There we go. I've gone all the way around that loop, and then I want to put another one in here. So this kind of allows me to basically like split that face in two. There we go. And then this becomes one face, and I'll take that forward. And now I've kind of, basically without even thinking about it, built a sort of big spaceship, and maybe I'll bring this guy back. And maybe this guy is going to get really, really big. Way, that's fun. Not too much because it's going to break the symmetry of it. Anyway, you can start to play around with sub D. I'm not the biggest, expert in sub D modeling, but very, very quickly we've got this thing that you can kind of push and pull around, and you can have fun with it. If it's useful, then use it, enjoy it. If you don't find it useful, I tend not to use it very much. But if it lands well for you, then great, go for it. If it doesn't, then go back to these kind of much more controlled ways of modeling. I think we'll pause for a second, do any questions, and then we'll have a 5-10 minute break. Questions on that? You got some good ideas for how you might go about modeling some more exciting things now? How are you getting on with the modeling task? Modeling a thing on your desk. Are you enjoying it? The thing to watch out for is when you start looking at things in your everyday world and you think, oh, how would I make that in Rhino? That is when your brain is really starting to solve these problems and kind of process these things. Give yourself a little challenge. Maybe get together with some friends and like pick a random object and say, right, 20 minutes, let's model this in Rhino. Bit of practice. It's always good for you. Any questions on that, on your task, on anything that we've covered in the last few weeks? Yeah.
I just have a question about on our timetable it says today is an intern or something. What's that about?
I think it got moved. The idea is that your task, task 2 is modeling a thing. The idea is that we have basically like a Q&A session where you can bring and present. We did the same with the mapping task. We basically had like, present your questions, I'll answer as many as I can. We'll do that before the end of term. But the thing about that task 1 and task 2, they're not due at any point before the end of your portfolio. So the interim thing is basically saying, this is your opportunity to ask questions. I think we're going to have that next week. It's not going to be this week. But it's not like you have to hand anything in and get it marked or anything like that. So don't worry about like handing stuff in. You can send stuff to me and Toby. You're very, very welcome to. But it's due in the portfolio at the end. But this is the opportunity to actually get some feedback on it to help. Cool. Should we take a break? Let's come back at 10:15 and I'll show you some more stuff before the end.